Good morning, comic book fans. Welcome to Comics in 5 Minutes. I'm Over No Shorty, and yes, that's been a bit of a delay, a bit of a hiatus, shall we say? Long Easter weekend, late deliveries. I've sometimes just been a bit too busy, but I'm back, and I'm going to review Cancelled, or otherwise known as John Burns Cancelled from Black Caravan, otherwise known as Scout Comics. And it's a horror comic book, and yeah, I know I've reviewed quite a few horror comic books recently. I totally have. It's not intentional; it just seems to be what's coming out at the moment. And I do like horror comic books, so it's not like I'm complaining too much. But this one was one that I didn't get on with to start with. I kind of flicked through it and got a sense of what was going on. But then I read it, like properly got into it and realized actually he's doing something quite clever, and I really found myself liking it again. And then at the tail end of it, I found myself thinking, oh, okay, now maybe it's not what I think it was. I'd like to say it's like a roller coaster of emotion of reading this comic book, but I think more like a very minor humpback bridge. Maybe you went over it a little bit too quick in the car. That's like the most exciting I can say about my experience of it. It's well written though. There is stuff I like about it. First of all, we're going to talk about the artwork, and it's quite a few different artists throughout it, which makes sense when you think about what the actual comic book is about. But it's the early stuff where there's a lot more going on, and it is the longest section of it, which I think is worth talking about the most. Because it does some really cool things with one-point perspective. I mean, that page there is absolutely brilliant. I say coloring, it's just shading, but it's absolutely fantastic. The textures that come across me are brilliant. But that panel there is actually a slightly better version. It's a lot more simplistic. You get a lot more sense of foreboding to it rather than just out-and-out action. And again, texture-wise, I absolutely adore it. What they do with rain is fantastic. It does flick art style through because it's a story that travels through time, starting in the 60s, then 70s, 80s, or so maybe 90s, I think. It's like late 70s or 80s, then to the 90s, then the 2000s or 2010s. And it does this by basically, it starts out kind of being like a story within a story. And it's the story of a guy who works in a TV show in the 60s who gets cancelled because he's basically doing educational kind of stuff, reading books, and doesn't get very good ratings. But we also realise that he's a drinker, and maybe there's been some complaints from parents, mainly mothers, or somebody think of the children, and he gets cancelled and replaced by a clown. He then goes on a bit of a drunken rampage and gets electrocuted to death and becomes a ghost haunting people through the TV, convincing children to murder their parents. Now that on its own is brilliant. Like, I'm okay with that story. That's absolutely fine. But then we get to like the first bit of cancelled, and I know what you're thinking. Comic book called Cancelled. There's Shorty. He's going to do a leftist thing about cancel culture. Well, no, it's not really about cancel culture. This thing is about being cancelled as a TV show and as a creator. And at the end of the first arc of it, it turns out that this thing that's haunting kids through their TV, everyone realizes what it is. It's not something in the water. It's not pollution or anything like that. It's literally just this spirit that gets them through the TV. So they just turn the TV off. And then it jumps to the 70s, and it's parents watching a movie, and the movie is about that story, and they're disappointed because it just gets solved by the fact that they turn the TV off and it's fine. But then they get murdered in their sleep by their daughter, who is using lines very reminiscent of the movie. So maybe the ghost followed them from the movie theater because that was like based on a true story. But it turns out then that is something he's watching late at night in Japan, and their younger brother has already gone and murdered their parents, and what looked to be a third party watching his parents have sex together. And then it jumps again to modern day with somebody watching something on a tablet, which is supposed to be Kung Fu Panda, but it turns out to be another one of these cancelled things. And it always appears to be the same spirit following them around. Now, the story within a story motif is not something I'm a big fan of. I think it can be overused, and I don't think it's necessarily something which I want to encourage. But I like the fact that this didn't feel like a story within a story. It actually felt like it was just one story. I like the idea that it started that way and flips it. It was really effective. Then I was thinking, okay, cool. So this isn't just using the medium to tell one story about another story about another story. This is the same story. It is the same spirit. But then when the final one hit, and I was like, oh, here it is again. Because when you get to the fourth iteration of this happening, unfortunately, it feels like you're already treading old ground, even if it's literally just one issue of a comic book. And that's not a great place to be for issue one of a comic book. And this is the premiere. This is like a big thing they're launching. So I'm guessing it's going to carry on with this ghost in the machine, as it were, haunting people's children and getting to do terrible things. And I like the idea that it's going to carry on. But maybe just overusing a motif, like it maybe didn't need to have all of that in the first issue. But it's well written and it looks cool like throughout. I wish that it find a way to maintain this style of artwork for the first part of it, because that is the best artwork. But I can't really complain because everything about it was fun in the end, and it does make me want to carry on watching it. But reading it. But in the end, I'm just worried that maybe that reliance on a certain trick could carry on playing through, and maybe as it's carrying on, maybe that over reliance on smart tricks might just be a sticking plaster or a band-aid over a quite basic story. Who knows though? It's only one issue. We'll have to wait and see. That's it for me today though. I'll be back, if not tomorrow, then next week. Until then, look after each other, everyone. Stay safe. Bye.